Sometimes the people who laugh the loudest are the ones who understand the least. That was the thought running through my head on the night everything changed, although at the time, I had no idea how important that moment would become. My name is Ethan Walker. I was 38 years old, living in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, Ohio, and by most standards, my life looked pretty successful. I owned a construction company with more than 40 employees. I had a nice house, a dependable pickup truck, and enough financial stability that I no longer worried about checking my bank account before buying groceries. But there was one thing my friends never let me forget. I was single. Every barbecue, every football watch party, every birthday dinner eventually turned into the same conversation. Come on, Ethan, when are you going to start dating again? You're not getting any younger. What are you waiting for? I usually laughed it off. The truth was that after a difficult relationship years earlier, I had become comfortable on my own. I enjoyed my routine. I liked the quiet. But apparently my friends saw my independence as a problem that needed solving. Looking back now, there were probably signs that something strange was brewing. For weeks, they kept exchanging glances whenever I walked into a room. Conversations stopped when I got close. A few of them seemed unusually interested in my schedule. At the time, I figured they were planning some harmless surprise. I never imagined I was becoming the center of one. Then came a Friday evening in early October. The air was cool, the leaves had started turning gold and red, and I had just finished a long 10-hour workday. I was looking forward to a quiet night at home when my friend Ryan called. "Cancel whatever boring plans you have," he said. "We finally found someone we want you to meet." I laughed. "You people really need a hobby." "Trust me," he replied. "Just show up." The way he said it made the rest of the group laugh in the background. I should have paid more attention to that. Instead, I agreed. An hour later, I was driving toward a small restaurant downtown. During the drive, my phone buzzed nonstop with messages from friends asking if I was on my way. The excitement seemed excessive for a simple introduction, but I ignored the feeling in my gut. When I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed something odd. Several familiar vehicles were parked farther away near the edge of the lot. It looked like some of my friends had arrived before me, even though none of them had mentioned joining us. I remember staring at those vehicles for a few seconds, feeling a strange sense that I was missing a piece of the puzzle. Then I shook it off, stepped out of my truck, adjusted my jacket, and headed toward the entrance. I had no way of knowing that inside that restaurant was a woman named Claire Bennett, and that before the night was over, the people laughing behind my back would stop laughing altogether. The hostess greeted me with a smile and led me toward a corner table near the windows. As we walked through the restaurant, I noticed a few people glance in my direction and then quickly look away. At first I assumed it was coincidence, but the feeling returned, that same feeling I had standing in the parking lot. Something was off. Then I saw her. Claire Bennett was already seated at the table. She looked up as I approached, offering a polite but slightly nervous smile. She had shoulder-length blonde hair, kind blue eyes, and a simple navy sweater that looked more practical than fashionable. There was nothing flashy about her appearance. Nothing that suggested she had spent hours preparing for the evening. Instead, she looked like someone who had rushed over after a long day and hoped she was not making a mistake. "Ethan," she asked. "That is me. I am Claire. It is nice to meet you." There was an awkward pause as we sat down. Not because of anything she did, but because blind dates always seemed to begin with two strangers trying to figure out why they had agreed to meet in the first place. Fortunately, Claire laughed softly and broke the tension. "I have to admit something," she said. "I almost canceled." "Really?" I asked. "Why?" She smiled. "Because my friends have been trying to set me up for years, and every attempt has been a disaster." I laughed. "Then we already have something in common." For the next several minutes, the conversation flowed surprisingly easily. We talked about work, favorite restaurants, growing up in Ohio, and the small everyday things that usually reveal more about a person than the big questions ever do. Claire worked as an administrative coordinator for a medical office. She spoke with quiet confidence and seemed genuinely interested in listening rather than simply waiting for her turn to talk. That alone made her different from many people I had met over the years. As the waitress brought our drinks, I happened to glance through the front window. Across the street, near a coffee shop, I spotted Ryan standing with two other friends. They were pretending to look at their phones, but all three were facing the restaurant. A moment later, one of them pointed toward the window. The others started laughing. When they realized I was looking in their direction, They immediately turned away. A strange knot formed in my stomach. Claire noticed my expression. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "I just thought I recognized someone." She nodded and continued talking, unaware of what I had seen. Still, my attention kept drifting back to the window. The more I thought about it, the more questions surfaced. Why were my friends nearby? Why had they seemed unusually excited about this date? And why did they look like spectators watching an event rather than friends hoping things went well? I did not have answers yet. What I did know was that Claire seemed completely unaware of whatever was happening. She was kind, thoughtful, and far more genuine than the picture my friends had painted. As the evening continued, one thing became increasingly clear. Whatever game my friends thought they were playing, they had badly misjudged the woman sitting across from me. The longer I sat across from Claire, the harder it became to understand what my friends had found so amusing. She was intelligent without trying to impress anyone, thoughtful without sounding rehearsed, and comfortable talking about real life instead of turning every conversation into a performance. Somewhere between discussing favorite childhood memories and debating the best local pizza places in Columbus, I realized I had stopped paying attention to the strange behavior outside the restaurant. For the first time in a long while, I was simply enjoying someone's company. Then our meals arrived, and the conversation shifted in a direction that revealed something deeper about who Claire really was. She mentioned that she rarely ate at restaurants like this anymore because most of her free time revolved around responsibilities at home. There was a brief hesitation before she continued, almost as if she was deciding how much to share with someone she had only known for an hour. "My schedule is not exactly flexible," she said with a small smile. "Most of my decisions have to take another person into account." I nodded. "You mean family?" Her expression softened immediately. "My son, Noah." For a moment, I noticed a completely different energy in her face. It was not just happiness. It was pride. The kind of pride people carry when they love someone more than themselves. "He is 8, she continued. "Third grade. Obsessed with science, dinosaurs, and asking questions that I cannot answer." I laughed. "Sounds like a full-time job." "Some days it feels like 2 full-time jobs." There was no bitterness in her voice. No self-pity. Just honesty. She talked about helping with homework after work, attending school events, and trying to balance responsibilities while making sure Noah still felt supported and loved. Listening to her, I could not help comparing her words to the assumptions people often made about single parents. So many stereotypes existed, and yet none of them matched the woman sitting across from me. She was not looking for someone to rescue her. She was not complaining about her circumstances. She was simply doing her best every day. At one point, she pulled out her phone when a notification appeared. "Sorry," she said. "My neighbor is watching Noah tonight." She glanced at the screen and smiled. Apparently, he just built a blanket fort that has taken over half the living room. She turned the phone slightly so I could see the picture. A young boy stood proudly beside an enormous structure made from blankets, chairs, and what appeared to be every pillow in the house. I found myself smiling too. "That is impressive engineering." That is exactly what he said. For the next few minutes, she told stories about Noah that made me laugh more than anything else that evening. The way she described him made it obvious that he was the center of her world. What surprised me most was how natural the conversation felt. Instead of feeling intimidated by the idea that she had a child, I found myself respecting her even more. Yet while Claire was sharing these stories, another thought lingered in the back of my mind. If my friends knew about Noah, if they knew the kind of person Claire truly was, then why had they acted as though this entire situation was some kind of joke? The answer still remained hidden, but I was beginning to suspect that whatever they thought they understood about Claire Bennett, they had gotten it completely wrong. By the time our dinner plates were nearly empty, I realized something unusual had happened. The nervousness that normally came with meeting someone new had completely disappeared. Claire and I were talking as if we had known each other much longer than a few hours. There was an ease to the conversation that felt rare. Every answer led naturally to another question, and every story seemed to reveal another layer of who she was. At one point I asked how long she had been raising Noah on her own. For the first time that evening, her expression grew thoughtful. She looked down at her glass for a moment before answering. "Almost 6 years." There was no drama in her voice. No attempt to gain sympathy. Just a simple statement of fact. "That cannot have been easy," I said. She gave a small laugh. "Easy is not the word I would choose." Then she shared pieces of her story. Not all at once, but gradually. She talked about working extra hours when Noah was younger. She talked about learning how to fix things around the house because hiring help was often too expensive. She talked about nights when she stayed awake worrying about bills and mornings when she got up anyway because a little boy depended on her. What struck me most was not the hardship itself. It was the way she described it. There was no bitterness toward life, no resentment toward people who had easier circumstances. Instead, she focused on what she had learned. She spoke about resilience, responsibility, and finding gratitude in small victories. The funny thing is, she said, smiling softly, if you had asked me 10 years ago what success looked like, I would have given you a completely different answer. What does success look like now? I asked. She glanced at the photo of Noah, still visible on her phone screen. Him feeling safe. Him growing up kind. Him knowing the noise of other conversations blended into the background until it felt as though we were sitting in our own private corner of the world. Then Claire surprised me with a question. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you agree to come tonight? I smiled. Honestly, because my friends refused to stop bothering me. She laughed. That sounds familiar. Then her smile faded slightly. Sometimes I think people assume they know what is best for me. There was something beneath that statement, something deeper than the words themselves. Before I could ask what she meant, her phone buzzed again. She checked the screen, and relief crossed her face. Everything okay? I asked. Yes, she said. Just Noah saying goodnight. She looked at the message for a moment before putting the phone away. Watching her, I could not shake the feeling that I was meeting someone remarkable. And the more I learned about her, the less sense my friend's behavior made. Whatever reason they had for arranging this evening, it was becoming impossible to believe they understood the woman sitting across from me at all. Eventually, the waitress brought the check, and both of us seemed surprised by how late it had become. What had felt like a short conversation had somehow stretched across most of the evening. As we stood from the table, Claire glanced at the time and smiled apologetically. I should probably get home before Noah decides his blanket fort needs a second floor. I laughed. That sounds like a reasonable concern. We walked together toward the parking lot, and the cool October air greeted us the moment we stepped outside. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind that happens when two people are both realizing they enjoyed a night more than they expected. Then Claire's phone rang. She looked at the screen and answered immediately. Her voice softened the moment she spoke. Hey, buddy. I could not hear Noah's side of the conversation, but I could hear enough to understand what was happening. Apparently, he was not ready to sleep. Claire listened patiently as he launched into what sounded like an extremely detailed explanation involving planets, dinosaurs, and a flashlight experiment. She never rushed him. She never sounded distracted. Even after a long workday and an evening out, she gave him her full attention. After a minute, she laughed and said, "Okay, future scientist, I will be home soon." When the call ended, she slipped the phone into her purse. Sorry about that. No need to apologize. He likes to give me nightly updates. I think that is a good sign. Her smile widened. I hope so. Then something unexpected happened. Another message arrived. Claire glanced at the screen, and her expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough for me to notice. Everything okay? I asked. Yes, she said after a brief pause. Just a friend checking in. For some reason, the answer felt incomplete. Before I could think more about it, movement across the parking lot caught my attention. Near the far end, partially hidden beside a row of parked vehicles, stood Ryan and two other friends. The moment they realized I had seen them, they turned away and pretended to be having a conversation. My stomach tightened. There was no innocent explanation anymore. They had been watching. Not accidentally. Deliberately. Claire followed my gaze. Do you know those guys? She asked. I hesitated. Unfortunately, yes. She looked confused. Have they been here all evening? It appears so. For a moment, she studied their direction, then looked back at me. That is a little strange. You can say that again. We both laughed, but beneath the humor, a question lingered between us. Why would anyone spend an entire evening watching a blind date from a distance? As we said goodnight and headed toward our vehicles, I could not shake the feeling that there was something important I still did not know. Claire drove away first, and I stood beside my truck for a few seconds watching her taillights disappear onto the road. Then I looked back toward my friends. They were gone. But whatever secret they thought they were hiding was beginning to reveal itself piece by piece. and I had a feeling the answers were much closer than they realized. The next morning, I woke up thinking about Claire. That alone surprised me. I had been on dates before, but very few stayed on my mind after they ended. Yet as I made coffee and looked out the kitchen window at the gray Ohio sky, I found myself replaying our conversations. The way she talked about Noah, the way she laughed, the quiet strength she carried without ever drawing attention to it. What stayed with me even more, however, was the strange behavior of my friends. By mid-morning, curiosity had become frustration. I sent Ryan a simple text asking why he and the others had been lurking around the restaurant. His response came almost immediately. Relax. It was just a joke. I stared at the message. Just a joke. The words bothered me more than they should have. I called him. What exactly does that mean? I asked the moment he answered. Ryan laughed. Come on, man. Do not act like you are upset. Explain it. There was a brief pause. Then he sighed. The guys thought it would be funny. What would be funny? Another pause. This one lasted longer. Finally, he said, honestly, we figured you would take one look at the situation and leave after 15 minutes. For a second, I thought I had misunderstood him. What situation? Ryan sounded uncomfortable now. You know, single mom, kid, complicated life. We just assumed. His voice trailed off. The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. You assumed what? I asked. That I would not be interested? Pretty much. I ended the call a few minutes later, but the conversation stayed with me all day. The more I thought about it, the worse it sounded. They had not set up a date because they believed Claire and I might connect. They had done it because they expected failure. Worse, they had apparently found the entire idea entertaining. Late that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a group message notification. Normally, I would have ignored it, but something made me open it. What I saw immediately turned my discomfort into disbelief. The conversation stretched back several days. Message after message appeared on the screen. Some contained predictions about how quickly I would leave. Others made assumptions about Claire without knowing anything about her. There were laughing emojis, running jokes, comments about how the date would be over before dessert arrived. Then I reached a message that stopped me cold. One friend had written, imagine his face when he realizes she has a kid. Several others had reacted with laughter. I lowered the phone and stared at the wall. For the first time, I understood the full picture. This had never been about helping me. It had never been about introducing two people. Someone's real life had been reduced to a punchline. Claire had no idea any of this was happening. As far as she knew, she had simply agreed to meet someone new. Sitting there alone in my kitchen, I felt something I had not expected. It was not embarrassment. It was disappointment. Deep disappointment in people I had considered close friends. And as I looked again at the messages on my screen, another thought entered my mind. If I felt this disturbed reading them, what would happen if Claire ever saw them herself? For almost 2 days, I debated what to do. Part of me wanted to forget the entire situation and move on. Another part knew that pretending nothing had happened would make me just as responsible as the people who started it. Claire deserved honesty. The problem was that honesty came with consequences. On Sunday afternoon, I finally sent her a message asking if she would be willing to meet for coffee. She agreed. We met at a small cafe near a park halfway between our neighborhoods. The moment I saw her walk through the door, smiling politely as she spotted me, the knot in my stomach tightened. She sat down across from me and immediately noticed something was wrong. You look serious, she said. That obvious? A little. I stared at my coffee cup for a moment before looking up. There is something I think you need to know. Her smile faded slightly. Okay. I explained everything. The phone messages. The comments. The assumptions. The fact that several of my friends had been watching from a distance throughout our date. I did not rush through it. I did not soften it either. She deserved the truth exactly as it happened. At first, Claire simply listened. The longer I spoke, the quieter she became. When I finished, she looked out the window without saying anything. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she let out a slow breath. I knew something felt strange. There was no anger in her voice. Somehow that made it worse. You did? I asked. She nodded. Not the whole thing, but enough. She stared at the table. The friend who checked on me that night? She was one of the people who helped arrange the date. My stomach dropped. She knew? Claire gave a sad smile. Apparently not all of it. She called me yesterday. Her eyes lowered. She felt guilty. Suddenly pieces of the puzzle began fitting together. The message Claire had received in the parking lot. The incomplete answers. The subtle shift in her expression. I am sorry, I said quietly. You have nothing to apologize for. I brought you into this. She immediately shook her head. No, they did. The disappointment in her voice hit harder than any anger could have. Do you know what bothers me most? She asked. I waited. It is not that they made assumptions about me. She looked down at her hands. People do that all the time. Single mother. Limited free time. Ordinary job. I am used to being underestimated. She swallowed before continuing. What hurts is realizing someone looked at my son and saw a reason to laugh. The words hung between us. I had no response because she was right. This was never just about her. It was about Noah too. The little boy proudly building blanket forts and dreaming about science experiments had somehow become part of a joke he never even knew existed. Claire blinked rapidly and looked away toward the window again. For the first time since I had met her, I saw the confidence disappear. Not completely, but enough to reveal the hurt underneath. And in that moment, I knew exactly what kind of person she was. Even now, she was not worried about herself. She was worried about her son. We sat in silence for a few moments after that. Outside the cafe window, families walked through the park, children chased each other across the grass, and life continued as though nothing had happened. But for Claire, something had changed. I could see it in her eyes. The confidence she carried so naturally now had a crack in it, not because of what people thought of her, but because someone had reduced her son's existence to a punchline. That was the part she could not ignore. Finally, I leaned forward. Claire, listen to me. She looked up. Those messages say far more about them than they do about you. She gave a faint smile. Maybe. Not maybe. Definitely. She studied my face, as if trying to decide whether I truly meant it. The truth was, I had never been more certain of anything. When I agreed to that date, I continued. I expected an awkward evening that I would probably forget in a week. That earned the smallest laugh. Fair enough. But what actually happened was the opposite. Her expression softened. What do you mean? I met someone kind. Someone who works hard. Someone who puts her child first and somehow still finds reasons to be positive. I shook my head. The more I think about it, the more ridiculous this whole thing becomes. For the first time since our conversation started, I saw a genuine smile return to her face. Not a big one, just enough to let me know she was listening. My phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at the screen. Another message from the group chat. Then another. And another. Apparently word had spread that I knew everything. Without even opening the messages, I turned the phone face down. Claire noticed. Them, she asked. Them. She sighed. You should probably hear what they have to say. Eventually. You are angry. I am disappointed. That answer surprised even me, because it was true. Anger fades. Disappointment stays longer. I had expected better from people I considered friends. Claire wrapped her hands around her coffee cup and looked thoughtful. You know what is strange? She said. What? If none of this had happened, we probably never would have met. I smiled. That is true. Life has a strange sense of humor. Apparently. We both laughed quietly. Then I made a decision. It was simple, but it felt important. Would you like to have dinner next Friday? I asked. She blinked. After all of this? Especially after all of this. For a second, she looked genuinely surprised. Then she smiled. Not the polite smile from our first meeting. Not the guarded smile from earlier that afternoon. This one reached her eyes. I would like that. As we stood to leave, I realized something important. The people who created this situation thought they were controlling the story. They thought they knew how it would end. They expected embarrassment, rejection, and a quick exit. Instead, they had accidentally introduced me to someone I respected more with every conversation. And when I finally addressed my friends later that evening, my reaction would be the one thing they never saw coming. That evening, I finally responded to the group chat. I did not write a long speech. I did not argue. I simply told them the truth. I told them I had read the messages. I told them I knew exactly what they had expected. And I told them they were completely wrong about Claire. The replies came almost immediately. Some tried to defend themselves. Others claimed it was harmless. A few apologized. But by then, none of those explanations mattered very much. The story they thought they were creating had already taken a different direction. Over the following months, Claire and I continued seeing each other. Slowly. Naturally. There was no dramatic rush. No fairy tale shortcuts. We built trust one conversation at a time. Eventually, I met Noah. To be honest, I was more nervous meeting him than I had been meeting Claire. The moment he introduced me to an elaborate cardboard project that he insisted was both a spaceship and a research laboratory, however, most of that nervousness disappeared. He was exactly as Claire had described him. Curious, energetic, and endlessly fascinated by how the world worked. Before long, Friday dinners became a regular tradition. Then weekend activities. Then science museum visits, baseball games, and movie nights. The more time I spent with them, the more I realized something important. The life my friends had mocked was not a burden. It was a gift. 1 year later, on a cool October evening that felt remarkably similar to the night everything began, I found myself standing in a backyard surrounded by friends, family, and people who genuinely cared about us. Claire stood beside me, smiling as Noah enthusiastically explained a new science experiment to anyone willing to listen. Looking around, it was hard to believe how much had changed in 12 months. Some of the friends involved in the original situation were still part of my life. To their credit, several had offered sincere apologies. Over time, most of them came to understand what they had failed to see before. Others drifted away, and that was fine too. Not every relationship is meant to last forever. What mattered was what remained. At one point during the evening, Ryan walked over and quietly shook his head. "You know," he said, "if somebody had told me a year ago that this was how things would turn out, I would never have believed it." I smiled. "That makes two of us." He looked toward Claire and Noah. "We got it wrong." "Yes," I said. "You did." There was no bitterness in the conversation anymore.